The poem Journey of the Magi is written by T.S.Eliot, and the theme of the poem derived from the Gospel account of the birth of Christ. The three wise men, who are called as Magi, having observed the rising of a bright star and interpreting it as a sign of the birth of the King of Jews, they set out for Jerusalem. During their journey, they always followed the direction of that rising star, and ultimately they came to the house in which Christ was born. They worshipped the infant and gave him gifts. These three men, they are giving an account of their journey. So, one of the Magi, he is telling all the hardships that they faced during their journey. The line is in quotation, "A cold coming we had of it," means it has been adapted from Bible, and that is why it is written in quotation. A cold coming means they are starting their journey in the time of cold season, and as we all know, Christ was born on 25th December, which is supposed to be the coldest day of the year. So he says, one of the Magi here is giving an account of the difficulties faced by the travelers and the memories of home and its pleasures and comforts which haunted their minds during their arduous journey through unknown tracks. So they were traveling in the season of winter and had faced many difficulties. Just the worst time of the year. Worst time of the year means the winters. Very severe cold for a journey, and such a long journey. The journey which they had undertaken was a very long one. The ways deep and the weather sharp, means the way which they took, it was unknown, it was new to them, and the weather itself was very severe cold, the very dead of winter. So in addition to the season, they had to face various difficulties, as for example the camels, and the camels got sore-footed refractory, means the camels on which they were traveling, these camels were having sore foot, means wounds in their foot, and painful, and they had the camel who were completely tired and refused to move further. So the poet is giving us the description of the three Magi who undertook the long journey in such difficult circumstances. The wounded camels, they were reluctant to proceed further, and then they remember the good old days and regretted that they should not have undertaken the journey. Lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted, means then they remembered, they recollected nostalgically the sensuous pleasures at home, the summer palaces on slope. They missed all their luxurious life in the palaces, the terraces, and the silken girls bringing sharbat. The silken girls stand for the women who used to serve them with drinks. Then the camel man cursing and grumbling, along with all these luxuries which they were missing, they also had to listen to the cursing and grumbling of the camel man and running away and wanting their liquor and women. So these camel men who were traveling along with them, at times they even ran away. Why? Because they were wanting to have their wines and women. And the night fires going out. Night fires means the warmth which they needed at such a cold night. It was also missing. It was going out. And the lack of shelter, they did not have proper place to rest. And the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly. The cities means the people who were living in the cities or towns. They were not at all ready to help them. So the journey was becoming all the more difficult. And the villagers dirty and charging high prices. The villages where they had any chance of staying, they themselves were very dirty, and in spite of the fact they charged high prices for the places where they wanted to take rest. A hard time we had of it, means they had a very hard time, and the difficulty was further increased by unfriendly cities and the towns and the people. Sleeping, so at the end we preferred to travel all night. They could not get proper place to rest, to take shelter. So what did they decide? They decided that they would travel all night instead of resting. Sleeping in snatches. Snatches means in short naps. They used to sleep. Instead of taking peaceful sleep, short naps with the voices singing in our ears saying that this was all folly. And every time they were reminded by their voice, inner voice, which said it was a great mistake on their part. They should not have undertaken such a difficult journey. So their enthusiasm was at times crossed by a doubt experienced by all the spiritual questers, that the journey itself may be a hoax or a wild goose chase, which signifies a foolish pursuit of something illusory. So the journey here refers to the inner journey of the soul, which is in quest of something new. Then in the second stanza we see that there is little hope. The second stanza of the poem, it marks the end of difficulty and despair, and we see that the emergence of hope and brighter prospect. So the second stanza begins by the line, then at dawn we came down to a temperate valley In the morning, they came to a valley. They reached a place and they could smell the vegetation, means the plants and the trees growing around. Wet below the snow line, smelling of vegetation. Vegetation means plantation, plants, etc. With the running stream and a watermill beating the dark, they could hear the murmur of the river. Running stream means the river. The murmur of the water, or the sound of a watermill which was rising above the cheerless silence of darkness. The water lashing, it created a sound. And three trees on the low sky. They could also witness three trees at the horizon. And an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. Another sign which is positive, that there is prospect of life, and it is suddenly enhanced by the picture of the old white horse galloping away in the meadow. Meadow means the place where the green grass grew. Then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lantern. Tavern means a place. You can call it an inn where people come to rest for the night. They came to a place, wanted to take rest. They reach a tavern, the inn, with vine leaves over the lantern, but they still continued their journey. At evening, reached their destination. They knocked and wanted to take rest, but there was no information, and so they continued and arrived at evening. By the evening, they arrived at their destination. Not a moment too soon, finding the place, it was, you may say, satisfactory. Means they arrived at a place where they were now ready to take rest, but this place was also not so very good. It was just satisfactory. Now, in the third stanza, the poet is giving the message that the important thing to be recorded is not so much the journey, but the psychological and spiritual impact with the birth they had gone all the way to witness. All this was a long time ago. I remember the Magi, one of the traveler, he is giving you this account that it was a long time ago and I would do it again, but set down this. He says the journey which they undertook, it was with the purpose, and he is ready to undertake such a journey again in spite of all the difficulties which they faced during their journey. Were we led all that way for birth or death? So this symbolizes birth of Christ, means birth of new tradition. There was a birth, certainly we had evidence and no doubt, birth of Christ, which marked the end of old order and establishment of new one. I had seen birth and death, means birth of new order and death of old order, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. Means the birth, it was hard to recognize, and the death, which is also hard. Both the things when a person takes birth as well as when he dies. It is not an easy job. Similarly, giving away old order, accepting new one is also a very difficult task. We return to our places, these kingdoms. Later on, these three travelers were recognized as the three kings, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation with an alien people clutching their gods. I should be glad of another that. What does this suggest? It suggests that the birth of Christ marked the death of old order, and that is why it was so disquieting for these magi who were also the kings. Now, the speaker is puzzled to think of the peculiar state of mind in which the new birth had plunged him, because this birth was quite different from the ordinary births they had witnessed in the world, births which were quite obviously distinct from death. But this birth, simultaneously in motion, a painful process, as it were, pang of which left them restless, and they have not yet recovered from its effect. So, the Magi yearns for a second process of death which may set him completely from the old ties and restore him fully to the new life, thought, and worship which were being opened to men by the birth of Christ.